right, we're live. Good evening, Canyon Lakers. I'm here with City Council candidate Dale Welty. We're at the pickleball court, so we continue our tour around Canyon Lake, and I get to ask some questions to Dale. He's running for City Council, and just a reminder, you get to vote for 3 candidates coming November 3rd. Sample ballots will be coming out next week. Physical ballots should be coming out the week after that. But I want to ask Dale some questions. But before we do that, and please keep in mind, you can go ahead and instant message me, text me. I'll be following along the way. But I want to start off with Dale just talking a little bit about why you decided to run for City Council, a little bit about yourself, so the viewers can take a look at you on why you're candidate.
Okay, the reason I decided to run for City Council is because I've spent basically the last decade pretty much in public service to our community. I started out basically in the tennis community, and the tennis community wanted some amenities, and so we developed a little committee, and I joined that committee. You just put your foot in the water, and then before long you start sliding in, and I was somewhat effective on that. And so the POA board and the POA people that ran the community said, we like what you did. So they invited me on to other communities. They invited me on to the finance committee. They invited me on to the FPC committee. Since one of my major goals while I was in the POA was to get things going for children, they also put me on the recreation committee, and I was the chairman of the recreation committee originally. And so that's somewhat why we're here at the pickleball courts. This was one of our significant projects. The rec committee was one of the best committees I've ever been on. Prior to that, every little club had their own committee, so of course every club wanted what they wanted. It was difficult to balance everything. So the rec committee came in. We brought in all the members from the different activities in the community, and they all sat around a table. And you would think there'd be a lot of bickering and fighting. It was wonderful. The only thing that they really did is they held everybody to a standard. They just simply say, "What do you want?" "Oh, we want 14 pickleball courts." And you get nowhere. You didn't get anywhere in the rec committee with that. The rec committee come back and say, "Why do you need that? How does it serve the community? How many people are you going to use? Have you seen them somewhere else? Can you give us an examples?" So the rec committee put all the other rec members to the task of providing the documentation, providing the evidence and story we needed in order to move ahead with projects. And once everyone did that, there was huge support from the other members for each other. We supported the equestrian center. We had Gina run around and check out footing for the horses, and she drove to Temecula, she drove to Corona, she brought in bags of samples. She did all sorts of things, but what we were looking for due diligence in the process of our decision making. And I think that's one of the key. With the pickleball courts, it started out with Jeanette Williams has experience in college sports. She was a director, so we brought her on. And one day we were up at the tennis courts, and she comes up to me and says, "I have this vision that we could bring pickleball to Canyon Lake." And she says, "I know you're a tennis player, but you think you could get them to share their courts a little bit?" And she went to me, and then she went to Bruce Yarborough, who was on the board, and got Bruce to play a couple rounds of pickleball up in Elsinore. So we brought it to the rec committee, which is what you do. The rec committee vetted it and realized we had a little bit of resources at the tennis club. So at the tennis club, the tennis people were very unhappy at first. They felt that they were losing something. The pickleball people took temporary courts and they put them out there, and they had a really an excellent time. There was a little bit of apprehension. And then lo and behold, as Jeanette had said, which I didn't necessarily believe, but Jeanette says this is going to grow to a monster. And within a year, we had as many pickleball members as we did tennis members. And so the courts got crowded, things got very tense, we vetted things. One meeting, the last one we had, it was a lot of energy. People were very upset and very angry. And what was very great in the process is that in that process, the pickleball people started talking to the tennis people, and they started working through a solution that they came to the board with. And so there was a lot of energy and a lot of rage. And I'm sitting in this room going, how wonderful it is that these people are engaged. They care about making this community a great place. They were afraid they were going to lose their amenity. That created very tension. But as a result of that, the two groups got together, the momentum, and moved the board to build this. This is one of the best pickleball facilities in the area. It's one of the most used facilities in the community, and it is, to my mind, one of our greatest successes. I think we started the development and got it built in about a year. The process through the FPC was wonderful. This was a real win, and what it took was, the committee's going through it. The openness to the members, and that we brought the members in for these meetings. Not that they were all pretty meetings, but we brought them in and they got to be part of the process. And I think that's one of the most important things you do as the city. We are going to see change in our future. We can't stay the same. We don't have anything blowing up in our face right now. We're in a somewhat stable place other than the COVID, but we still need to look to change to the future. And as we make this change, we need to get the community members involved. We need to have open sessions. We need to have opportunities for the members to come and put their input, because without that, we're not serving the community.
Perfect. That's good. No, that's really good. I want to move along because I got a couple questions coming in as we're talking, so I want to make sure they get addressed. One of the questions, I'm going to word it a little bit differently to the person who submitted it. In your experience dealing with stakeholders throughout our community, obviously there's different stakeholders that hold different positions. So can you give an example of some of these organizations or boards throughout the community that you've been either a part of or seen in action, and how that maybe will shape public policy if elected to the city council?
I've been involved with a lot of the stakeholders inside the community, not outside, but inside the ones we worked with. Obviously, we worked with all the recreation people. We worked with the golf community. We worked with the obviously the pickleball community. We worked with some of the youth communities to get them on board. We had a big meetings with the clubs about how the clubs were going to do we're going to have a proper balance of sharing the facilities between the clubs and the members. The interesting ones, you get more complicated. I was in the facilities planning committee. That's where we looked at all the facilities. We put together a 5-year plan. We put together a direction. We worked on that, and then I was on the finance committee for about 4 years. The finance committee was probably one of my favorites. We were able to look at certain things. When I first got there, it seemed to be like there was a lot of things, a lot of personal-driven items or a lot of group-driven items that were driving the ship, almost all the way across the board. But over time, we changed it to go, this isn't going to be about one group. This isn't going to be about just what your people want. This is going to be about what's best for the community, and that policy of going back to the stakeholders and saying, you've got to do your due diligence. You've got to come forward. We started shifting to what are people going to feel about what we're going to do about fees, to, well, what about the market analysis going to do? What are the professionals? What is the neighboring areas doing? How can we balance that membership privilege with the fees? And so we really started becoming very analytical. We really started doing our due diligence. We really could be held to a standard that we did the research, and that was probably the most important thing.
When we look at some of the things on the city side of it, several different meetings have taken place throughout the history of the community, some in which you were a part of, some you're not. One that comes to mind is the round table, or even the joint meeting that took place. What would your vision be moving forward if elected to city council, to maybe keep those moving forward or to change them? How would you see yourself involved in that capacity?
In the roundtable, Randy Bonner was really the one that led that. When I came into the roundtable about 5 years ago, there was not that many people at the time. This is a sad news, but this is a reality. There was a lot of conflict between EVMWD, there was conflict with the POA, there was conflict with the city, and the attendance at Randy's group was not really that well attended. But over the last 5 years, everybody has worked together. We've gone beyond just civility with each other. We've developed friendships, we've developed relationships, and that's so important. We're a tiny city. What goes around us is very, very important, and we have to be able to work with those people the stakeholders, like the water company, like the city, like the POA, like the city of Menifee, and like the city of Elsinore, so we're not adversarial. Even the other two cities, Menifee and Lake Elsinore, they still need to join, and we need to develop goals as an area, and we need to work together. I've worked with the water board people. I've worked with some of the people in Menifee. I've worked with some of the people in Elsinore. I develop relationships, and when I go talk to them, that instant, I'm going to be tense when the person talks to me is gone. They sit down and we have open and honest conversation, and that's just a lot of work. And that level of relationship is really where we need to be at in this community.
You talked a little bit about listening to the community, so much so bringing a pickleball court is what we talked about. So right now there's a conversation going on about marijuana. I've talked about it. I'm actually going door to door asking people's input on it because I think it's so important. Where do you stand on allowing dispensaries to come in and sell marijuana? Like I had mentioned in Larry's interview, obviously it's legal in the state of California, but in Canyon Lake, we don't allow for it to be sold. So where's your stance on that, if you have one, and maybe some insight?
A couple of things. One, I have a little bias maybe against it, because I don't. Like 40 years ago, I smoked some marijuana, and you know what? It just didn't do me any good. So personally, it's not something that's a part of me. My wife has never done it, and she's happy to tell me that she's glad she never did. On the other hand, you know, it is legal now. It is acceptable. I also, I mean, we had a prohibition on alcohol for many years, and that was a huge failure. So we now go up to the town center and we sell alcohol about 4 or 5 different places. It doesn't really seem like marijuana is terribly worse than alcohol. It seems like the people in the community are accepting it. But that being said, I clearly don't want to see somebody out there with a marijuana leaf sticking out of their hat and a big sign with an arrow on it going, "Come here." So we need to, if we were to make it happen, we need to make sure it is done very discreetly, it's done very cleanly, and it's not something that they drive into Canyon Lake and go, "Hey, look at the guy with the big marijuana tree." It's got to be done that protects our children and protects our community from becoming, you know, known. That can't be what we're known for.
Absolutely. Speaking of what we're known for, Canyon Lake, it's very simple to say that I think our heart, our pulse of the community is our lake. Without it, it wouldn't be Canyon Lake.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about your insight on the lake, maybe the direction, some of your involvement. From a city perspective, if elected to city council, how would you lead that charge? Knowing if you have any background at all, share with us on the lake.
There are 3 primary stakeholders with the lake. One is the POA, the other is EVMWD, and the third one, which is the smaller player, but important player, is the city. So it started out, we're going to talk about how much conflict we had 10 years ago. We had a litigation going with the EVMWD. We wouldn't talk to each other. There was nothing nice to say. Every sort of conversation had to be through our attorneys. It was very expensive and it had a lot of conflict. As we went through the process, as we negotiated, we went back and we have developed relationships with those people. There's still a little pain underneath, but we can now have a conversation with them. So that work on the Lake Litigation Committee and my time on the POA board when we were working with EVMWD was excellent. And again, we've changed the dynamics of how we communicate, and that's critically important. I was also on the Dredge Committee. The Dredge Committee, as we got on it, we had a lot of things that we were believing that weren't necessarily true. And as we worked through the data and we did our due diligence again, we found out that one thing the assumption was is the lake in the East Bay was filling up about 3 inches a year. We went out and did basically studies. We need to do some by scientists, but basically said the soil's coming in, but it's basically rolling down to the other side, to the other end of the East Bay. So the chances of this end of the East Bay hitting dirt in the next year or two is pretty unlikely. But the consequences to the health of the lake, the consequences to the length of that the lake can survive, is all impacted by the dredge. The lake is basically filled about half full of dirt since it was dug. So at some point in time, we all have to work together to get a plan. The city needs to be part of the grant team because it's going to be very expensive, and we need to be working on the grant. I worked on that when we applied for the grant a year and a half ago. I was part of the team that worked on the grant. I sat through the grant orientation meetings. I saw their procedures and their matrices. So I was very engaged in grants. And grants is something I've done for a living for about 15 years as part of my job. What I did was I did grants for disabled veterans, and my job was to go to the veteran's house, develop a scope of work, develop a project, look at his finances, look at funding sources, and then I would submit that grant package and we would go out and work on the veteran's home. But the process of doing grants, you just don't go raise your hand and say, throw money at me. I want to use that word, my due diligence is my word for the day. To do a grant, you have to do your due diligence. You've got to come in with the data. You've got to come in and show why this not only serves Canyon Lake, why it serves the community as a whole.
Absolutely, I think that's good. You know, when you're dealing with local government, there's so many different inner workings that take place in order to shape and create public policy. If you were elected to the city council, what would be your vision? What would be something that you would want to see done at the local level that you can bring? You have a background in water. I know you have a background in finance, contract negotiations. Talk a little bit about your vision if elected, what you would want to try to pursue.
My biggest vision is coming from the real estate background, working as an appraiser for 3 decades. My real thing is, what about this land that's inside the city that's not being used? BLM owns a big piece of it. At some point, the city will probably get some say over that. I want to put together, you make sure we have a long-term plan of what's going to happen to that area. And our long-term plan may just be kind of a narrative at first because it's so far out. But we're going to talk about how we're going to preserve open space, how we're going to serve the recreation of the community. The question people are very nervous about what's going to go on with them losing their area to ride. And we have to bring all those concerns, bring them into a document. So though we may not be sketching plot plans, we may not be doing anything by putting on houses, we need to do that. And I have to tell you about the rumors I've heard. I've heard rumors that the POA and the city were going to bring 4,000 houses in, and they were going to hook to the POA, and all that was going to happen. I was on the board involved in the POA for many years. I never heard anything about bringing 4,000 houses into the POA. It was never even discussed. That doesn't mean the city can't incorporate land that doesn't go through our HOA, and they can't have that within the city. That could clearly happen. But if it does, we need to make sure whatever building is done, whatever happens, serves our community and serves our residences. It isn't like we're going to let them run wild and make all the money and basically use the land poorly. That land needs to be used at the end of the day to serve our people. We need to make sure our people have a voice in that, and we need to make sure that our people all also listen to realize that they have to compromise when we move ahead with that.
The last question that I have before we allow you some closing remarks, there's been a lot of talk in regards to being incorporated or unincorporated. I think this is a conversation that most people talk about. So tell us a little bit if you think that we should still be a city, or if we should unincorporate. What's your feeling on that? And if elected, what would you champion, either to stay a city or to not stay a city?
I see the biggest problem I see with not staying a city as we are is basically that open land. I can tell you at some point that open land is going to be open and used by somebody. And my own feeling is that if Elsinore had control or Menifee has control, we in Canyon Lake are a little tiny voice in the back. They're not going to make huge decisions because members of Canyon Lake want land protected. That's not going to. They're going to be thinking about what's good for the 150,000 people over in their area, or the 150,000 people in Elsinore, and they're going to weigh that 150,000 against our 10,000, and we're not going to have that big a voice. And that's really my biggest fear. And so if we do that, we have to be very careful. On the other side of the fence is that I think we should do more things together. Maybe we can. One thing I always talked about the youth. We can't support the recreational facilities in Canyon Lake that we have. The kids have to go outside of here for soccer. They go outside of here for baseball. We want to make sure those relationships are good and realize that there's some things we are good at, which is having the lake and the skiing. But maybe we're not so good at a baseball team because we just don't have enough kids in here to really provide a level of play. And we may have to accept what are we good at, what are we bad at, and work with the other cities. And so our kids in here have the best opportunity to succeed. And that doesn't mean we stop them from going to an Elsinore program or stop them going to a Menifee program. We make sure our kids are aware of them and they can move and do good at that.
I love it. Local control is so important to the community, which is why we're doing this. And thank you for joining us. But thank you for also submitting your questions. It's so important that we do this on social media because of obviously COVID-19, and Don and I are trying to give as much exposure to the candidates as we possibly can, which is why we're meeting Dale here at the pickleball courts and asking him the questions that you've presented to me over the last few weeks. In closing, Dale, tell us a little bit about why we should vote for you. We got an election coming up. I think we're right at 30 days or less until Election Day. We got mail-in ballots coming here pretty soon. We get to pick 3 candidates for this upcoming election. So please tell us why we should be voting for you for City Council.
I really have to say it's my 10 years of dedication working in the community. You learn the things you learn in those 10 years is incredibly important about how things work. One of the things you really learn is that how do you listen to the people? How do you inform the people? How do you make sure that the people in the community are not hearing pieces and bits and pieces that basically very scare them? We have to make a big effort to get them in sort of the processes. The other part of the 10 years is all the relationships that I developed. I've got relationships with the VMWD board. I got relationships clearly with the POA. I got relationships with the city, and some relationships with Menifee. My wife happens to be on the school board in Menifee and works with them. So the fact that we have those relationships, the fact that I believe I've built up a trusting relationships where they feel comfortable communicating with me, that they're not going to come in and say, oh, I can't talk to this person because they're so driven by their own agenda that they don't listen. And I think that's what people say one of my faults is that, well, you'll come to you and you won't make a decision. And my thing is I'm data driven. What I do all day is basically analyze data. I read a lot. My reading speed is off the charts. I'll tell you an example. Right now, I'm taking my son Nick through. He's 13 through the college classes. We just did the Constitution, so he had that class. Now he's doing the federal papers, and I'm teaching him how the law works in the Constitution. But that's kind of my nature, is to dig deep into whatever information. So if a decision comes before the board, I will be informed, and I'll talk about public safety. And the reality is, one thing you have to accept about yourself is what you don't know. And the reality is I don't know a lot about public safety, but we have people on the council, and we have people that are running that have great experience in public safety. And I'm going to go to them and say, hey, you're kind of the one that has the expertise. Hey, so I'm going to listen to you, but mind, while you know, I'm going to walk you down the due diligence path. I'm going to make sure as you make these decisions, I'm going to make sure you did your due diligence and you come forward together and you present something that I believe in.
Yeah, I love that. And just like he said, public safety is so important. And as some of you probably noticed, we put out our stats, and Canyon Lake continues to be the safest city in Riverside County, and we're proud of that. And it is so important that we champion that for our community. Thanks again for tuning in. Again, this is Dale Welty. He's running for city council. You can like his Facebook page. He's got information out. He's doing regular posts. I know that they can reach out to you via instant message as well. But stay tuned, because Don and I are headed over to the business community, to our town center, to talk with Paul, who's also running for city council, and we'll keep the tour around Canyon Lake moving forward. Thank you so much.